Now, quickly before I get into the video, if you could drop a like on it right now and subscribe to the channel, that would help out a lot. Other than that, let's get into the video. Now, if you would have told me the Pistons would be without Luke Kennard and Bruce Brown, Blake Griffin and Derrick Rose would still be on the team. They would have gone through about 17 centers in the space of 24 hours. They would have got two of the best prospects in the draft. They would have lost Christian Wood, only to sign Jeremy Grant for 3 years, $60 million. And that would only be in the space of a few days. Yeah, I wouldn't have exactly known what to say at the time. Now, a week later, I kind of have an idea of what's going on, and I think it's a good thing, pretty much most of the things they've done. But yeah, there's definitely been a lot of moves, and a lot of moves that look a bit confusing on the surface, but I think when you surround those moves with the right context, then you might start to understand what the Pistons are doing, and what they're doing is actually pretty promising. Now, I'm just going to get straight into things. Let's look at the positives. The draft was fantastic. They got Killian Hayes, a point guard that they needed. They needed to draft a point guard. While Hayes was at the 7th pick, some people's top prospect at the very least. Most people thought he was a top 10 prospect. Some had him towards the top end with 1 to 3. Some people really liked him. I saw that from Kevin O'Connor, a lot of draft experts as well that I follow. Those guys really liked him. And some people thought he was just at the very least going to be like a good NBA player because he's got size, he's got ability, he's got passing ability, he's got pretty good upside as a defender. He's a 3-level scorer. He can pretty much do everything. It's just his athleticism that has question marks over it, so whether he gets to that next level is yet to be seen. We then had Sadiq Bey, who I think is a great prospect. Some people thought he could go as high as the lottery. He slipped to 19th. He's a Villanova 3-and-D guy. I mean, you look at Josh Hart, Mikal Bridges, and then you look at other Villanova guys, Dante DiVincenzo, Jalen Brunson. They just all turn out to be good NBA players, and I expect nothing less from someone who shot 45% from 3 in college, a great defender, someone who's just going to be a great player to immediately fill a role later in the first round. Another great pick. And then you got another player in Isaiah Stewart, who I think at first a lot of people were surprised with. He's kind of a back-to-the-basket type center, but what he does have is a nice arsenal of moves in the post. He's got a really good hook shot, which I think is never going to go out of fashion. Yeah, you can argue that back-to-the-basket players are going out of fashion, but if you've got a nice hook shot, if you've got nice post moves that can get you a bucket, that's not going to go out of fashion. He's got a mid-range shot and can shoot from the free throw line, which suggests he's going to stretch the floor eventually, and he's already shown signs of doing so that's good as well. The draft has been good, but I've kind of talked about that. It was a good draft, Saban Lee as well. Nothing too much else to say about that. And then you look at the signings, which were a bit confusing at first. Jeremy Grant, 3 years, $60 million. People thought that was an overpay. I don't agree with that. I think at 3 years, $60 million for someone like Grant, who's proven himself in the playoffs, he's at the very least a very, very good 3-and-D player, which goes for about $15 million on the market. Someone of that level is a 3-and-D player. And then we've never really seen him with the ball in his hands as much as he's going to get in Detroit, which might lead to more opportunities, might lead to some playmaking, some getting to the basket, a lot of things. Maybe he's going to be a 16 to 18 point per game kind of guy. And then all of a sudden that contract looks very good. And also what you have with this contract is we know that he can contend on a championship level team like the Nuggets. So we know teams could be interested in him later in the season. And when there's a championship on the line, you'll come to see that teams will trade away assets and weather maybe a bad contract to get in someone of that ability. We saw it with Marcus Morris and the Clippers. They traded away picks to bring in that contract. Grant's younger, probably a better player, and makes more sense. Not a locker room issue either. So I think teams could definitely end up trading a couple of first-round picks the way of the Pistons if they want to do that later in the year. So that's a positive. That's a great move to get someone like him through the door. You then had the Mason Plumlee one, the centers. That was all a bit weird. I don't think too much of Plumlee. I mean, he's solid, $8 million a year. Maybe it's a slight overpay. He was going to get like 6 to 7. He's one of the best backup centers in the league. Another player that I think during the year, if you wanted to trade to a contender, you probably won't get first-round picks, but you might get a second-round pick, another second-round pick, and you're just going to get him off the books if you want. A team would take him because he's provided good backup play for a team like the Nuggets that have contended, so like he could be traded if they needed to do so, but in the time being, he's a 30-year-old backup center that's going to be solid in the team. So there's nothing really of note there. I think people were just overreacting. It's a solid signing. There's nothing else to really say. And then you look at the smaller signings, which I liked a lot more. You look at Josh Jackson and Jahlil Okafor. All of these guys, high-end draft picks, have really had bad situations for their career, have shown promise at different times. Not really Zaire Smith yet in the NBA, but Jackson towards the end of his time as a Grizzlies player was pretty good. Like, he was averaging about 10 points a game. He's got solid defense. He can shoot the ball a bit. He can get to the rim. He's a pretty good player. He was the 4th overall pick, so he's got promise, and going to Detroit minimum contract, high reward, very low risk. If he doesn't work out, then he doesn't work out. There's nothing else to say. Same goes for Okafor, who's only 24. Another high reward, low risk. Like, perfect kind of moves you make as a rebuilding team. You take a chance on these guys that other teams don't want to take a chance on because they don't have the opportunity to do so, but you do, so you get the chance of maybe getting a steal in Jackson or Okafor, D&D type guy. At the very least, he's going to be a good defender in the league, I think, and then if you can give him opportunity as an offensive player, he could probably blossom into something a bit more than that, which I think is a great pickup for just getting rid of Tony Bradley for that. Yeah, that's great. But I think most people have been confused with Detroit is because they don't really know what they're doing. They look at a team that people thought was just going to blow up the whole team. Get rid of Blake, get rid of D-Rose, get rid of everyone, get rid of anyone good, and then just rebuild. But Detroit have talked about how they want to build a culture of good, athletic, motivated, defensive-minded guys, and that's what they've done. Jeremy Grant, Josh Jackson, Okafor, all of these guys, Zaire Smith, he fits that bill as well. All of these guys that they've brought in, even Sadiq Bey, Isaiah Stewart, these are all guys with high raps on their work ethic, their defensive ability, their athleticism, all of these things that contributed to the reason the Pistons picked them up. And sure, they might not be looking to bottom out completely, but what they're looking to do is probably have a down year, a couple of down years, and get a top draft pick, but not completely suck, because we've seen that doesn't necessarily lead to success. You have to still have a culture around you, otherwise the team just is a complete stench, and it takes a long time to get over that. And even if you completely suck, get lucky, get top picks in great drafts, you look at the 76ers, and they still haven't done anything with it. I mean, it's a good team, and you'd be happy to be in that situation a few years from now. But they had everything go right. They got a top 1 pick in Ben Simmons, another number 1 pick in Markelle Fultz, Joel Embiid. They got all of these players and it still didn't work out. And that was after being the worst team in NBA history. So it doesn't necessarily always lead to results. We've seen the Kings, the Suns, these teams not really turn it around just from being terrible for a few years. It doesn't necessarily lead to results. And that's what the Pistons know. Particularly when the lottery, you could finish like 8th from last and get the first pick. You could finish last and get the 8th pick. I mean, your chances are higher. Would you rather be more competitive, get that kind of into the young players, and then get a top 5 pick, or just be absolutely terrible, build a terrible culture, have your coach fired every couple of months, and then end up with the 3rd pick, and then he goes into a situation like Jackson in Phoenix, and he doesn't work out, and then all of a sudden you're just stuck in the mud, and you're a terrible team for several years. That's exactly what could happen, and that's why Detroit are keeping some veteran players and looking to make signings like Grant that initially don't really look like they make sense, because why would a team like that look to sign someone like Grant? Well, that's why. But overall, when you looked at this team, what would you have wanted them to do? Have a good draft, have a good free agency, and take high reward, low risk kind of guys, and then get in a few proven guys through the door. That's exactly what they've done. Some people wanted them to trade Blake Griffin. I don't want that to happen yet, because you look at the CP3 situation, he was seen as a complete negative asset, the worst contract in the league. A year later, after being healthy, after having a good run in OKC, he's good. He's a positive asset. They get a first-round pick and more players for him in return. What's to say the same thing can't happen for Blake Griffin? You look at it this way. So Detroit either keep him, he stays healthy, and they're good. That's fine. They're happy with that. They don't mind that. He either gets injured, which we hope doesn't happen. Obviously, if you think that's a good thing, then you're sick. But he gets injured. They're a terrible team. They get a top draft pick. That's a good thing as well. Obviously, not the injury, but in terms of the top draft pick. Either way, it's not really a negative to have him on the team. It's just pretty simple common sense. You don't trade low, you trade high. I think people were confused because of the order of how everything happened. It was just like they signed 5 centers, they signed someone to a huge contract, they let go of Christian Wood, they did all these things, they traded players, they got draft picks, and it's like, what's really going on? But when you look at it, they brought in youth players, they brought in players with low risk, high reward. They got someone like Jeremy Grant, Mason Plumlee, who were good locker room presences, good players for a team trying to build a good culture. And they did all of these things while still keeping Blake Griffin and Derrick Rose, who they could later trade for more first-round picks. Or if they don't trade them, then they're still benefiting from their presence, either off the court, on the court, a number of those things. So either way, I think the Detroit Pistons had a very good offseason. I think it was a bit confusing at first, and it's probably still confusing to a lot of people. But when you actually look at it from the perspective that I'm sure the Pistons looked at it, then you probably come to find that this offseason was a success, which is all you can hope for, which is all you can ask for. And heading into next year, there's a lot of things to look forward to because you've got a number of young, nice players. You've got Jeremy Grant, who I think could explode. There's a potential for him to be that kind of guy where he turns into a most improved type guy, finally given the chances. He's never really had the chances to get the touches, maybe he turns into that. After getting so much confidence from having some great games against the Lakers, maybe he's just so high on himself now that he thinks he can drop 20 a night. Who knows? That would be great. That would be fantastic. Even if it doesn't happen, at the very least, he's going to be a good pick. And I think Detroit had a very good offseason, a confusing one, but a good one. If you did enjoy the video, a like would be greatly appreciated. Also, subbing to the channel helps a lot. Other than that, I'll catch you next time. Bye.